charged with conspiring with the Russian government to influence the election. Do you accept that no member of the Trump team engaged in that kind of criminal conspiracy with Russia?
Well, I don't know. First of all, we don't know what indictments are forthcoming from other investigations that have been spun out by the special prosecutor to the Southern District of New York or the Eastern District of Virginia.
Right, but his main mission was about Russia. You think he would? Yes. You think Mueller would send that to other parts of the Justice Department?
I don't know. That's one of the things we will have to see when we read the report, and that's one of the reasons that I think it's so crucial that the entire report and the evidence underlying it be released to the public. Transparency is key here. I mean, obviously, we know there was some collusion. I mean, we know that the president's son and campaign manager were involved in a meeting with the Russians to receive a stolen, they thought was to receive stolen information stolen by the Russians from the Democratic National Committee as part of the Russian government attempt to help Trump in the election. That's the way the email inviting him to the meeting put it.
But none of what you just said has risen to the level of criminal indictment by the special counsel.
No, it hasn't, as far as we know. But we know there was collusion. Why there's been no indictments, we don't know. But let me say further. We know a number of things. We know what I just said. We know that the president pressured the FBI to go easy, to stop investigating Flynn and various other people. We know that he fired the FBI director to, as he put it, to NBC to take care of the Russian thing in order to stop the investigation of various people associated with him. We know that he concocted the lie about the purpose of that Russian meeting. We know that a lot of his top associates have been indicted and convicted, and we know that he has engaged in a relentless 2-year attack against the FBI, various law enforcement
agencies. So on that note, Mr. Chairman, what you're describing is evidence to back up what you said before, that you believe the president has obstructed justice. You still believe that?
Well, there have been obstructions of justice, whether they're criminal obstructions is another question. But we have, the special prosecutor is limited in scope. His job was limited in scope and limited to crimes. What Congress has to do is look at a broader picture. We are in charge, we have the responsibility of protecting the rule of law, of looking at obstructions of justice, at looking at abuses of power, at corruption, in order to protect the rule of law so that our democratic institutions are not greatly damaged by this president.
So on
that's
that
what we intend to do.
Right, and on that very note, if Robert Mueller comes out in his report and suggests very strongly, or states flat out, that he agrees with you that the president obstructed justice, or that the president may have committed some crime that DOJ guidelines don't allow to be indicted, will you begin impeachment proceedings?
It's way too early to speculate about that. Remember, it is true that the Justice Department thinks that they cannot indict a sitting president no matter what the evidence, as a matter of law. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it even more important that all the evidence be given to Congress and the American people, because while the normal rule is, and it's a good rule, that if you're not indicting someone because you don't have enough evidence, you don't then smear their name by saying they did these terrible things. If you're not indicting someone because you can't, as a matter of law, then you can't hold the president accountable. The only other institution that can is Congress, and you should not then hide the evidence because that converts it into a cover-up.
Right.
Congress needs that evidence, and the American people need that evidence and information to make judgments.
Well, let me ask you about that, because
Chairman Schiff, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks, George.
You know, the biggest news from Robert Mueller so far is that there are no new indictments for that underlying any cooperation with the conspiracy with the Russians to interfere in our elections. And we're already seeing Rudy Giuliani come out with a tweet yesterday about that, citing you. He said your previous statement saying there's significant of collusion involving the Trump campaign. I trust he, Adam Schiff, is relieved there is no collusion, and I hope he will apologize for his mistake. We all make them. The real virtue is to admit it. It would help us heal. You gonna apologize?
I think Mr. Giuliani would be wise to wait until the report is made public before making any pronouncements about vindication. And likewise, people should wait to determine just how incriminating it is. We know that the special counsel was not permitted to indict a sitting president, and we ought to see what evidence he produced, both on the issue of conspiracy as well as on the issue of obstruction of justice. So Mr. Giuliani would be wise to do something he has rarely done, and that is wait till we see the facts.
You have said, though, in the past there was significant evidence of collusion. How do you square that with Robert Mueller's decision not to indict anyone?
And there is significant evidence of collusion, and we've set that out time and time again, from the secret meetings in Trump Tower to the conversations between Flynn, the Russian ambassador, to the providing of polling data to someone linked to Russian intelligence, and Stone's conversation with WikiLeaks and the GRU through
None of it prosecuted.
No, that's true. And as I pointed out on your show many times, there's a difference between compelling evidence of collusion and whether the special counsel concludes that he can prove beyond a reasonable doubt the criminal charge of conspiracy. And as I've said before, George, I leave that decision to Bob Mueller, and I have full confidence in him. And I think, frankly, the country owes Bob Mueller a debt of gratitude for conducting the investigation as professionally as he has. So I have trust in his prosecutorial judgment, but that doesn't mean, of course, that there isn't compelling and incriminating evidence that should be shared with the American people.
What you're seeing some of the president's allies already say is that this is vindication for the president.
Well, they've been saying with each indictment that it's vindication, that now about 6 people close to the president have been indicted. That hardly looks like vindication to me. But again, let's see what the report has to say. If they're so confident that the report is going to exonerate them, they should fight to make that report and the underlying evidence public and available to Congress. But I suspect that we'll find those words of transparency to prove hollow, that in fact they will fight to make sure that Congress doesn't get this underlying evidence. But we are going to take it as far as necessary to make sure that we do. We have an independent obligation to share the facts with the American people. We in the Intelligence Committee have a particular obligation to determine whether there is evidence that the president may be compromised in any way, whether that is criminal or not. And, of course, there are indications that he was pursuing money in Russia through Trump Tower and other potential real estate that could be deeply compromising.
You say you're going to take it as far as necessary. That means subpoena first, then sue?
It means make the request. If the request is denied, subpoena. If the subpoenas are denied, we will hold people before the Congress. And, yes, we will prosecute in court as necessary to get this information. And, you know, I'll say this. I think that Neil Katyal's prognostication is quite correct. We will win that litigation.
Why are you so
sure? The Justice Department will be, well, because how do you make the case as the Justice Department that after providing 880,000 pages of discovery to a Republican Congress in answer to subpoenas, that somehow you're precluded from providing that information to Congress in the Trump investigation? When likewise in the Clinton investigation, there were no indictments. For Rod Rosenstein or others to say it's our policy not to share information with those not indicted, they should explain that to Bruce Orr or Andy McCabe or Peter Strzok or Lisa Page or countless others, Hillary Clinton, for whom they provided hundreds of thousands of pages of information to Congress, much of it made public. So I would hate to defend that double standard in court, and if they try, they'll not only lose, but they will damage any reputation for impartiality. So I think they need to be transparent, and I hope they recognize it.
You also asked Robert Mueller to examine transcripts of Donald Trump Jr., Eric Prince, Jared Kushner for possible false statements. No charges there either. Surprised?
I don't know. That's a difficult charge to prove. When we release the transcripts, people can make their own judgment about how truthful or forthcoming they were. But as I said at the time, I wanted the special counsel to be able to review the transcripts, not just for the purpose of determining whether people lied to us, as indeed people did, but also what evidence they show on the central issues that he was investigating.
There's no public evidence that Robert Mueller even interviewed Don Jr. We know he didn't interview the president. Mistake?
Yes, I think, and I've said this all along, it was a mistake to rely on written responses by the president. That's generally more what the lawyer has to say than what the individual has to say. I can certainly understand why the lawyers like Giuliani were fighting this, because the president is someone who seems pathologically incapable of telling the truth for long periods of time. But nonetheless, if you really do want the truth, you need to put people under oath. and that should have been done. But the special counsel may have made the decision that as he could not indict a sitting president on the obstruction issue, as it would draw out his investigation, that didn't make sense. And one other point in terms of the timing of this report, George, which I think is significant, and that is this report has come out so far in advance of the election that the contents can be made public, that the public can have that access to information without violating any policy about disclosure prior to an election, and that's very important.
You mentioned that the criminal investigation was only one part of Robert Mueller's job. He also took over the counterintelligence investigation into Russian interference as well. I was a little puzzled that the Speaker is ruling out any classified briefing about that counterintelligence investigation. Isn't that the normal course of business for your committee and the so-called Gang of Eight?
There may be a time down the road with respect to specific classified information that goes to a source or method where they would want to brief us on that. But I think what the Speaker is saying, and I completely agree, is do not think you can bury this report. Do not think you can bury the evidence in secret by briefing 8 people in Congress and say we've discharged our responsibility. That's not going to cut it. So it is essential that the report be made completely public. And the reservations that you've mentioned, the legal issues. One thing is abundantly clear about the special counsel regulations, and that is the Attorney General has the discretion to make it completely public. And if he's going to live up to his words that he will do so consistent with law and policy, that means making it all public. So I think the Speaker is quite right. There are key counterintelligence concerns that we have as a committee, the Intelligence Committee. And remember, this began as a counterintelligence investigation, not a criminal one. And in our committee, it remains a counterintelligence investigation. We need to be able to see any evidence that this president or people around him may be compromised by a foreign power. And we, of course, seen all kinds of disturbing indications that this president has a relationship with Putin that is very difficult to justify or explain.
You told the San Francisco Chronicle on Friday, if there's no bombshell, there's no impeachment. Does no new indictments qualify as no bombshell?
Not necessarily, because again, George, as you pointed out, they can't indict the president. That's their policy, and therefore there could be overwhelming evidence on the obstruction issue, and I don't know that that's the case. But if there were overwhelming evidence of criminality on the president's part, then the Congress would need to consider that remedy if indictment is foreclosed. So it's really too early to make those judgments. We need to see the report, and then I think we'll all have a factual basis to discuss what does this mean for the American people, what risks are we running with this president, what steps does Congress need to take to protect the country. But in the absence of those facts, those judgments are impossible to make.
As you know, some of your Republican colleagues are saying that by continuing this investigation after Mueller is done, you're moving the goalposts.
The investigation is a criminal investigation. Congress's responsibility is very different, and that is it's our responsibility to tell the American people these are the facts. This is what your president has done. This is what his key campaign and appointees have done. These are the issues that we need to take action on. This is potential compromise. There is evidence, for example, quite in the public realm, that the president sought to make money from the Russians, sought the Kremlin's help to make money during the presidential campaign while denying business ties with the Russians. That is obviously deeply compromising, and if it's this president's view that he still wants to build that tower when he is out of office, that may further compromise his policy towards Putin, towards Russia, and other things. It's our duty to expose that and take corrective action.
Chairman Schiff, thanks for your time.
Donald Trump's done. He's done. There's no question about that. He's done.
Breaking news.
A bombshell.
Today is a turning point. Today was historically bad for President Trump.
Today was a turning point.
A turning point. We're at a turning point here.
The beginning of the end for the Trump presidency.
The beginning of the end.
And breaking news.
We have another bombshell.
Mike Pence might have to assume the office of the presidency.
The call for impeachment.
Rumblings of the word impeachment.
Breaking news.
Another bombshell out of the White House.
I believe this is the beginning of the end.
I do too.
It's really the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
He may be feeling the walls closing in on him.
All the walls closing in on him.
The walls closing in on him.
Breaking news, a new bombshell.
One astrologer says this means the beginning of the end for President Donald Trump.
The beginning of the end of the Trump presidency.
Trump will resign.
Trump is going to resign.
Is this the tipping point? I know we've said it over and over.
You think this is a tipping point?
And over and over.
This is a tipping point.
And over and over.
Breaking news, President Trump off the rails.
It was the beginning of the end today.
The beginning of the end.
It reminds me a lot of the last days of Nixon.
Breaking news tonight, new bombshell.
This is the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
The walls are closing in.
The walls closing in.
The wall's closing in.
Breaking overnight bombshell.
This is a very dramatic day, and I think it might be near a tipping point. Do you think this is a tipping point?
This is unbelievable. This is remarkable. Have you ever seen anything like this?
His presidency is crippled.
December 1st, 2017, you can mark it down. This is the day that everything changed.
We begin with the bombshell.
The beginning of the end?
The beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end. The beginning of the end.
In fact, if this were a football game, we're in the third quarter. May even be the beginning of the end.
We begin tonight with the bombshell. Donald Trump is in a lot of trouble.
Trump is in trouble.
The president will resign.
Another hour, another bombshell.
This is a tipping point.
Trump's going down.
This president could be impeached.
I do not think the president will serve out his term.
Resignation.
Resignation. I don't think this president is going to serve out his term. Mr. Trump will not serve out his term. He will not serve out his term. No way. No how.
Breaking news.
Absolute bombshell.
I think Donald Trump is in trouble.
Donald Trump is not. He's done. And it's over.
It's over.
The wall's closing in.
The walls closing in.
This is going to be the Achilles heel.
Breaking news tonight. I expect Trump to depart.
This week will be the watershed week.
Trump is in big trouble.
Trump's in a lot of trouble.
It's a sign of a terrified old man who feels the
Walls
Closing in.
The walls
are increasingly
Closing in on him.
Tonight, the walls
are closing in.
today changed everything. This is the beginning
of the end.
Today, the biggest
Tipping point for the Trump administration.
What a historic day. The bombshells, they fell.
It's entropy and it's crumbling internally.
He's underwater. He feels
The walls closing in.
Could his testimony be a turning point?
we may be at a tipping point.
It's the beginning of
The end.
The beginning
of the end.
Another bombshell.
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 This is a bombshell.
It is a bombshell.
I am beginning to resent the word bombshell.